There are moments in history when the world does not witness heroism on a battlefield, nor inside the grand halls of power, but in the narrow, suffocating space of a crisis that erupts without warning. Moments where the line between life and death thins to the width of a single breath. Moments where a single human being, unarmed, unnoticed, and uncelebrated, stands between disaster and salvation. This story belongs to such a moment. The incident occurred aboard Flight 907, a mid-range civilian aircraft quietly cutting across the cold upper layers of the evening sky. Inside, 200 passengers rested, talked, argued, slept, each lost in their own private world. None of them knew that within just a few minutes their worlds would collide in a single point of terror. Among them sat Sergeant Adil Rahman, traveling alone, wearing simple civilian clothes, blending into the crowd by choice. He was a man who preferred silence over attention and routine over drama. But beneath his calm appearance lay a past that few knew. Adil was once part of the Special Bomb Disposal Squad, a unit trained to walk straight into situations that everyone else fled from. His career had been forged through long nights, trembling hands, and impossible decisions. And although he was no longer active duty, the instincts carved into him had never left. They never do. In the cockpit, Captain Elmore and First Officer Lucas monitored their controls with the confidence of thousands of flight hours. Everything was routine until it wasn't. The first signal came as a simple call from the cabin crew. "Captain, we have a situation." Then came the whisper, trembling, urgent. "A passenger received a message. A bomb has been planted on the aircraft." The cockpit froze. Bomb threats were rare, but never ignored. One wrong decision could doom an entire aircraft. One wrong moment, and 200 innocent lives could scatter across the ocean below. The captain activated emergency protocols, locking the cockpit and securing communication channels. Tension surged like electricity through the fuselage. Passengers sensed it immediately, the quiet shift in the attitude of the crew, the movement of staff up and down the aisles, the hushed instructions whispered into radios. Fear spreads quickly in a closed space. As panic began to ripple, Adil looked up. He observed everything. The trembling steps of the flight attendant, the captain's pale expression reflected in the glass of the cockpit door, the distant clicking of buckles as people braced themselves. He did not panic, not because he was fearless, but because he understood fear better than most. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood quietly, and approached the nearest flight attendant. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. His voice was controlled, steady, like someone who had practiced calm under fire. She explained everything. The anonymous message, the confirmation that it was not a prank, the possibility that a device was hidden somewhere on the aircraft. "Do you have bomb disposal experience?" she asked desperately, seeing something in his eyes that she couldn't explain. Adil nodded once. It was a small gesture, but in that tiny movement, the fate of Flight 907 began to shift. Time became a weapon. Adil moved through the aircraft with silent precision, scanning, listening, reading the panic in the air. Every vibration of the plane, every misplaced object, every suspicious detail was a clue. He requested the crew to halt all passenger movement. "No one touches anything. No one tries to help. Just stay calm." His voice cut through the hysteria like a blade. He checked the lavatories, storage compartments, seat pockets. Nothing. Then he reached the rear galley, an area that passengers rarely observed closely. Something was wrong. Behind a panel near the service cart was a faint metallic click, too soft for normal turbulence, too deliberate for coincidence. Adil pressed his ear closer. His heart began to hammer, not from fear, but from recognition. He knew that sound, a timed device. He removed the panel with careful surgical motion, revealing a compact explosive rigged with crude yet deadly precision. The timer showed only minutes remaining. The flight attendant gasped. "Can you disarm it?" Adil didn't answer immediately. His mind raced through possibilities, the circuits, the power source, the triggers. A mistake here would mean an instant flash, a tearing of metal, and a silent fall through clouds. He exhaled slowly. Then, with hands that had once saved entire battalions, he touched the device. There was a sharp click. The plane went silent. Every passenger turned their head, freezing in terror, as if the entire aircraft held its breath. Then a second click, sharper, final. Adil severed the trigger wire. The timer died. He lifted the device carefully, opened a secondary panel, and neutralized the detonator with a precise twist known only to those who had lived through this work. The bomb was dead. The danger was over. The aircraft was saved, but the shockwave of what had just happened was only beginning. The cabin erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned, trembling silence. Dozens of passengers stared at Adil as if he had descended from some forgotten historical tale. Some wept, others whispered prayers, others simply stared, unable to comprehend how close they had come to death. Flight attendants stood motionless, their faces pale, their hands shaking. The senior attendant, Melissa, approached Adil with a voice that could barely form words. "Sir, you saved all of us." Adil, still kneeling next to the neutralized bomb, simply shook his head. "Check the passengers. Make sure everyone is calm. Secure the galley." His tone was not proud nor dramatic. It was the voice of someone who had never done this for applause. The captain called him to the cockpit. "Whoever you are," Captain Elmore said, his voice weighted with awe, "you prevented a catastrophe. We owe you our lives." Adil merely replied, "I did what anyone trained to do this would have done." But Captain Elmore quietly understood. No, most people, even trained ones, would have frozen. As the aircraft descended toward an emergency landing, the atmosphere changed. Panic transformed into contemplation. The passengers began to process the truth. They had been seconds away from becoming a breaking news headline. In row 14, a father hugged his daughter for the first time in months. In row 22, an elderly woman clutched her prayer beads with grateful tears. In row 3, a businessman deleted an angry email he had written earlier, suddenly ashamed of his pettiness. Crisis had stripped them all bare, and in its place came humility. Once on the ground, the aircraft was surrounded by security teams, investigators, and emergency units. Authorities rushed in, but their urgency paused the moment they saw Adil walking out quietly, hands behind his back, posture humble. One officer stopped him. "Sir, we need your name for the report." Adil hesitated. Names bring attention. Attention brings noise. He preferred neither. But Melissa, the senior flight attendant, stepped forward. "He's the reason every one of us is alive. Treat him with respect." The officer looked back at Adil with newfound reverence. "Then we'll do this properly." Inside the debriefing room, investigators questioned him with clinical precision. But one moment stood out. The chief inspector, a stern man hardened by years of dealing with threats, leaned back and whispered almost to himself, "Skill is a gift, but courage, that's a choice." He looked at Adil. "And today, you chose for all of us." Adil replied with quiet firmness, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite it. Fear reminds us that we are human. Action reminds us that we must protect humanity." Those words stayed in the air long after the conversation ended. Passengers later testified that a single man had kept calm while the rest of the aircraft trembled. Crew members reported that he worked with the precision of a surgeon and the composure of a saint. But Adil did not stay to receive praise. Once cleared, he walked out of the airport without looking back, carrying nothing but a quiet gratitude that he had been at the right place at the right time. The moral of the story became clear to all who heard it. Arrogance creates danger. Panic magnifies it. But skill, discipline, and humility, together, defeat it. In the weeks that followed, Flight 907 became the center of global attention. News outlets reported the miracle landing, the mysterious passenger, and the incredible defusing of a live bomb mid-flight. Experts analyzed photos of the device, marveling at the precision required to neutralize it in such a confined space. But the most intriguing part was the identity of the unnamed hero. Reporters speculated, investigators whispered, and passengers shared their versions of the story. But no one could agree on who he was. Some claimed he was a retired military officer. Others believed he was special forces. A few suggested he was still active duty but traveling undercover. One child simply said, "He was the bravest man I ever saw." Whispers turned into stories, stories turned into a legend, and the legend turned into something more, a reminder of the quiet heroes who live among ordinary people. Years later, aviation safety programs referenced the Flight 907 incident as an example of civilian heroism under extreme pressure. Bomb disposal units use the story during training, emphasizing how calm analysis is the real weapon against chaos. Passengers who survived the flight continued telling the tale to their children and grandchildren, not as a tale of terror, but as a lesson in human courage. And what of Adil Rahman? He returned to his quiet life, working in a modest job far removed from the world of crises. Nobody who met him later ever guessed that he had once held 200 lives in his steady hands. Occasionally, when someone recognized him from blurry news footage or from the testimony of a fellow passenger, they would approach him with awe. "Sir," they would ask, "how did you stay so calm that day?" And Adil would give the same answer, always delivered with the humility of a man who had faced death enough times to understand its silence. Calm does not come from fearlessness. Calm comes from responsibility. When lives depend on you, fear becomes a luxury. Duty does not. Over time, these words became the final, enduring line in the legend of Flight 907, a line spoken in training rooms, classrooms, and even by pilots addressing young crew members. A lesson carved not by power, nor rank, nor authority, but by skill, humility, and moral courage. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories from Histofy.